When you're scrolling through Amazon looking at a weld in a box, it's easy to get that "it looks great on the screen" feeling. I'd been there seeing a sleek, stainless-coated welder, a glossy photo of a perfect bead, and thinking, this is exactly what I need. Then the package arrives, you hook it up, and the first pass looks more like a smudge than a clean weld. That's the exact frustration that sent me digging deeper before I spent a few $100s on the PowerTIG 315LX. If you're on the fence, the link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I started by watching a few YouTube builds and reading the technical Q&A sections, because the specs alone don't tell you how a machine behaves in a cramped garage or a mobile shop trailer. What matters is whether the unit can actually hold a steady arc when you're moving between steel frames, whether the pulse function really helps with thin sheet work, and if the machine can survive the occasional power surge you get from an old-school breaker panel. Those are the bits that turn a good spec sheet into a good daily tool. First off, the PowerTIG 315LX is a 315 amp TIG/stick welder that runs on a standard 240-volt single-phase outlet. The biggest selling point is the IGBT power module, essentially a solid-state switch that lets the welder ramp up and down quickly, which is where the pulse capability comes from. In practice, that means you can set a 750 Hz pulse for thin material without the arc wandering or the weld pool overheating. I tried it on a 1mm stainless steel sheet for a custom bike frame, using the pulse at about 120 amps. The bead stayed narrow, the heat-affected zone stayed minimal, and I didn't end up with the dreaded warping that's common with older sear diode units. If you're a hobbyist who does a lot of art-style welding or a fabricator who needs consistent thin sheet results, that pulse is a real time saver. Now, the heavy-duty design claim is more than just marketing fluff. The casing is a thick, powder-coated steel chassis that feels solid enough to survive being bumped around a workbench. In my shop, I accidentally knocked the unit with a spool of wire and there was no dent, no rattling, just the reassuring thud of a welder built to stay put. That durability translates into fewer service calls and, frankly, peace of mind when you're setting up a temporary job site. In a mobile welding trailer, where you're constantly loading and unloading gear, that resilience is worth the extra couple of pounds. One feature that often trips newcomers up is the pre- and post-flow control. Most entry-level TIG welders just let you set a single gas flow rate. The 315LX lets you program a short boost of shielding gas right before the arc strikes, pre-flow, and a tail after you finish, post-flow. I found the pre-flow especially helpful when I was welding in a drafty garage. By adding a half second of extra argon before the arc, the weld puddle didn't get that scooped-out look that usually happens when ambient air sneaks in. The post-flow gave me clean tops on a series of thin plate joints, saving a few minutes of cleanup per piece. If you work in less than perfect conditions outdoor repairs, a busy shop floor, this control can be the difference between a passable weld and a professional one. The machine also supports E6010 flux cord stick welding, which opens a whole other set of applications. I ran a quick test on a rusty pipe using a 4-inch E6010 stick at 200 amps. The arc started instantly, and the stick maintained a stable burn even as the pipe surface gave way. That versatility makes the 315LX a true multi-process unit. In a real-world scenario, you could be doing precise TIG on aluminum frames in the morning, then switch to a stick weld to repair a steel chassis in the afternoon without swapping machines. For a freelance welder who needs to cover a variety of jobs, that flexibility is a clear value add. But no machine is perfect, and there are a couple of practical trade-offs to be aware of. First, the power draw. Even though it's a 315 amp machine, it still pulls close to the full 30 kilowatts from a typical 240-volt outlet. In an older house with a 30 amp breaker, you'll need to make sure the circuit can handle the load, or you risk tripping the breaker mid-weld. I had to upgrade one circuit in my garage to a 40 amp breaker just to keep the welder from cutting out during a long, continuous run. If you're renting a space or using a limited panel, you might want to double-check your electrical capacity before buying. Another nuance is the learning curve for the pulse settings. The machine gives you a wide range of pulse frequencies and duty cycles, which is great for fine-tuning, but it can be overwhelming if you've never played with pulse before. I spent a decent chunk of my first afternoon just dialing in the right numbers for a 3mm carbon steel plate. Once you get the hang of the basic presets, low pulse for thin sheet, higher duty for thicker,